Hello, welcome back. So today's my first information-based video, and I would like to start really in the alchemy of words, in understanding that we do cast spells. That's why we spell our words, and spells are casted out through play and imagination, through acting, through having the idea be conceived, to understanding you believe it could be achieved, and then living in the dance of play and imagining until you can see it in reality, coming to life. So originally, one of Earth's oldest languages, previous to things like the Lemurian and the really old Atlantean kinds of languages, most commonly known to most of us is the Hebrew language. And they really, whoever they are, whoever, them being a group or just a couple of incredibly smart beings, just tweaked with our letters, with our sounds, and English was born, and they've even got a word for words in English. So if you'd like to confuse, make sure there's lots of things, lots and lots of words. But so if you'd like to add some diction, you just add diction, and because diction is literally words. It's the English word for words. So going back to light frequency style languages like the Mandarin that the Chinese still speak today, it's done in tones, it's done in sounds. It really is hard to translate because they truly don't speak a language as such as we do. They have a vibrational frequency and understanding within tone and delivery of sounds. So what happens when we've been told these stories of witches and warlocks and all of those things, and they had they would stand on altars, and they would be in the center of circles. They would have wands, they would wave their hands, and they would obviously chant words and things like as such that have been deemed scary. And look, you and I, you know as well as I do just how much truth is actually in all of that story. Perhaps it's super true and that's exactly how it took place. Perhaps it was more like we understand our historical tribal indigenous heritage that's throughout the world. That's I tend to more feel that way, that it was more of the indigenous sort of tribal understandings and way knowledge that was used, rather than standing in dark rooms and cauldrons and such. However, if we are going to look at what happens when a magician wants to cast a spell, well, they first need to write it. So they need to write the spell from their mind, from the thought, take it from the concept, and put it into some words that can see some form of belief that it's achievable. And so they write this spell to bring their concept into belief. And they do this from an elevated platform using a baton or a wand or a staff, and the spell is casted out by the conductor. It's the magician or musician has assembled an ensemble of casts, and that ensemble that they've casted this spell or this these notations and ask them. They in turn, obviously, as the orchestra symphony conductor does, they dictate from the podium out of what's called a book of scores, not a book of shadows. So from this book of scores, which are basically written notations of music symbols, that's what plays an orchestra. The magician or the musician, the conductor, leads and controls the winds, the strings, the brass, the bass, all with specific timing, intervals, notes, chords. He conducts verses, choruses, creates beginnings, endings. He sets the tempos. He sets the tune, and it's all casted with intention, casted with the power of mind, words, and hands. Hands and symbols, very specifically delivered with intention, all in gestures that dictate the whole melody, basically the whole shape, all of its contours, the movements of any sound. It's all the whole circular curation that has been created from those gestures and notations of timing, etc., bringing movement and sound together to create an entire symphony, an opus. So we've got, well, they say there's 4 different types of instruments. You've got your string, wind, brass and percussion. However, they kind of just leave out the organ or the pipe instruments, so those big church organs and those big, powerful, so they've kind of got the percussive pounding to create it, but it's still using the air flow through pipes and those organs to create it, so that there really is 5 different elements there. And so we're looking at the 5 elements. I bring that up for a reason, because the 5 elements being water, fire, air, earth, and of course spirit, our ether. So if we look back or reflect even back onto, and I don't really, in my experience, I can't think of a single Indigenous origin story that began without a beat, without, whether it was the crow's wings or the eagles, the beating of the eagles, or whether it was the sound of the whoos of the running. You could hear the dudunk, you could hear it, and it came from the animals that surrounded them. So they really understood, or had a very firm knowledge, belief, that the percussions, the beat, the tempo was brought in wings. It was brought, and that's our spirit. So they always say that it was our spirit. That's where our heartbeat began. So back in the day, it was stomping feet. It was the chuk 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 of maracas. They're nice, simple little drums and things like that. They had strings, obviously. They had their harps and their basic string instruments that they would utilise, which, with the strings, it's actually the fire. So the strings are our straight lines that our strings basically can raise up or can draw down a song. Or music, it can. The string instruments really do need to come in with the right timing, tempo, notes. They need to come in with a lot more thought and precision, so as to not collapse the entire symphony of sound. Just as fire is delicate within the way it needs to move, so it can either destroy and completely transmute to make something completely new, dismantle the whole lot, or it can bring warmth and light. The strengths. You've got the brass instruments, our earth instruments. So they're the ones that the sounds are created through vibrations. And they're forced through reeds. It really is the earth. It's where those where the our air that's been provided to our brass instruments has been forced into the metals of the earth, and combined with the softness of the earth's reeds, our breath, and brought together, they all vibrate to bring us even things like our didgeridoo. So even though it's a wood instrument, it's all those vibrations that brought it all into matter. The flutes and the whistles, all of those soft, delicate sounds. Obviously, the winds, the air. It's the sounds that are in the song lines, that are in our spirit. They whistle, they blow, they howl, they sing. They're soft. They're often not. And they're in and they're out. They're our breath, they're our voice. They're actually our compass. It's those soft sounds that help us navigate our way through, like the whales would. But we must listen. So if we look back and we're thinking about how we're trying to plant a seed today, where we open a flower of understanding that magic is very real. It's not from the movies. It was just a very effective way to cast those spells. And from the Hollywood Hills to boot. If I want to look that up, or I'm sure I'll do a video on it one day. But magicians used wood made from the holly tree, Hollywood ones. So if witches, warlocks, merlins, and magic mystery, is what happened, then why, how, who? So why? Well, it's very simple. It's a bit unpleasant. It was for greed, it was for control, it was for ownership, and it was from a place of ignorance that's kept it just turning over for thousands of years now. And how they done it? Well, they done it with fear, through segregation and through confusion. It created violence and more fear, more confusion. So who done it? Well, basically it was the royal bloodlines from way back. It doesn't really matter who their names were or what label, but there was an origin point. We can't go back and change that, so blame is really just completely unnecessary, but it is helpful to understand its origins because it helps us to navigate through to a new outcome. So the royal bloodlines, basically, the royal tie, dictated that they would control any peoples that were not of pure genetic origins, so not of blue blood. And it began with music. So music was a really easy tool. Music and language was a lovely way to confuse, create fear from not much at all. So if we look back at where orchestras began, because as we just discussed, music has been being played in groups for a very long time, much longer than our civilized societies. And to play any set of instruments together as a group, it's got to be brought together with some kind of conjuitive understanding, and they did not require once a central conductor. there was harmony within the groups, within the people, within their understandings of existence. So how did it, or when, so we're going back to like the early Greek, early Roman times, like pre-Shakespeare and all that sort of stuff. So when they would basically have a demonstration of a scene or a scenario that was performed for an audience. It would be delivered from a stage, so it was staged by actors, and originally they were played out without words, so the orchestra was incredibly important, the music was very important. So any part of the storyline that they wanted to summarize in the story that wasn't being portrayed clearly within the music, they would use signs. Literally, they would have people hold up signs with specific words. So when, a certain tempo or tone or instrument sound was being played, they could dictate the tone of the vision that we were perceiving these things through. So using movements, they control the movements, the functions within the music. And originally, going back to when they have the audience come to their stage with the central stage and all of those things, the chorus music was actually the crowd, and it was really important for the conductor to have the crowd or the chorus behave appropriately, accordingly with the music, so it enhanced the show. So the chorus really was the symphony of movements and the functions that were dictated to summarize the story, to set that tempo, to set, the speed, the depth, and dictate the vision of which those sounds were shared. So when we cast with intention, we don't necessarily have to use wands or staffs. However, our gestures do dictate the melodic shapes and contours, movements of our external world. So it's funny because since it's little, they'd say, "Oh, the world doesn't revolve around you," but my world does revolve around me because I'm the only one in my world, and my world which really does. So I understand, though, I'm a very small piece of a very large part, and without all small pieces, the whole large part doesn't function. So we are the maestras, or the Holy Symphony, which is actually what a maestro or maestra is, the Holy Symphony player. So magicians first wrote spells from the mind, and it hasn't changed today. So I look forward to catching up on our next video. It's been nearly 24 minutes, and I hope that all of the information has been relevant, and that I've been able to stay on topic or point. I do get a little lost. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time. Love and light. Bye.